Chapter 3, Invitation. It was a rainy morning, so Ted had to wear his rain suit, jacket, pants, and a hood with a long visor. The rain gear made bike riding a hot and sticky business. Ted would have much rather been wet with rain instead of sweat, but his mom insisted. The bright yellow plastic kept the rain off, and it helped drivers to see her son more clearly. The rain suit made Mrs. Hammond feel good. It made Ted feel like a giant goldfinch. Besides, this was one morning he didn't want to be visible from half a mile away. When Ted reached the junction of County Road 7 and Route 2, he didn't stop and pick up his bundle of newspapers. He was going to do that on the way back. Besides, his shoulder bag was loaded. He made a pre-dawn raid on the kitchen. 3 cans of soup, a plastic bag of dinner rolls, 6 oatmeal raisin cookies, and a 2-liter soda bottle he had washed out and filled up with milk. Because if April and Artie and Alexa were still around, they probably needed more food. Ted turned right on the state highway and pedaled the last half a mile as quickly as he could, glad to see that the rain was stopping. His mom and dad had known the Kowazinski family, but Ted had never met them. Their place had been empty a lot longer than the Anderson farm. When the highway was clear of traffic, Ted turned off onto the long curving driveway. It was lined with a windbreak of scraggly cedar trees, which was good. They blocked the view from the highway and gave Ted some cover as he approached the house. The roof of the wide front porch was sagging, and the wooden siding that had once been white was weathered and gray. Half a dozen bricks from the chimney lay scattered across the upper roof, and large patches of shingles had been blown away. The front door and the first floor window were boarded over, but not fully covered. A lot of the second floor windows were broken, probably by rocks. Behind the house and to the left, one side of the main barn was caved in. A ragged fence line limped toward the barn, posts leaning every which way, all covered with tangled vines and rusty barbed wire. The whole place looked dismal and unfriendly, and Ted almost wished April and her family weren't here, but they were. As he walked his bike around the back corner of the house, Ted inspected a patch of rain, softened ground, and he saw clear footprints. April's sneakers, the same footprints he'd seen in the dust inside the Anderson house. And when he looked up, there she was, looking out at him through a big rip in the back screen door. She was wearing the NASCAR shirt again. April gave him a little wave and half a smile, but when Ted said, "Hey," she shook her head and put her fingers to her lips. After he tiptoed up onto the back porch, she whispered, "I don't want Mama to know you're here. I've been watching you get your newspapers every morning from an upstairs window. Took you a while to find us." Ted nodded. "I thought you were gone, and I even thought it was my fault. That last day I left, my teacher was driving past and she saw me, and I had to tell her about you." April's face darkened, so Ted rushed ahead. "But I made her promise not to tell anybody, and she didn't. She could have, and I know she felt like she ought to, but she didn't. She's okay, really. And that's not why the police came. It was some high school kids came out there, but you probably figured that out." She shook her head. "We didn't know anything. One second we were all asleep, and then there's all these voices and flashing lights. We hid out upstairs in a closet, and when it got quiet, we came here. It was bad, and my mom's still upset, but I can work it out. And Artie's been more help than he was. We're going as soon as we can, as soon as Mom can handle it. I'm going to work it out." All this was said in whispers, with the torn screen door between them. And the second time April said she was going to work it out, Ted thought, "She's like me. She's trying to do everything herself." As if he had known it all his life instead of for less than one day, Ted said, "You know, it's okay to get help when you need it. And you need help, especially your mom." She hissed, "There's nothing wrong with her." "I know that, but we don't need any help." Ted said, "Then why'd you leave me that note in the other house?" "Food," said April with a toss of her head. "We just needed food." "Fine, here." And Ted unloaded his shoulder bag. You can tell your mom you found all this lying on the back steps, and don't bother saying thank you. Don't want you to feel obliged, since you don't need any help." He pulled something else from his bag and set it next to the soup. "And you might as well keep this too." It was the old copy of Little Women, carefully wrapped in plastic to keep it dry. Ted was all the way back at his bicycle before April caught up to him. He spun around and she said, I just don't know what I ought to do. I just don't." Ted said, "Well, me either, not exactly. But if you want, I can tell you one thing for sure." April nodded and said, "I know for sure that you and your mom and brother have to get out of here right away and into a real house, someplace where you can stay like visitors. Otherwise, your mom will get into trouble because of you and Artie mostly. Parents aren't allowed to keep kids out of school or to keep kids in a house with no plumbing or electricity or anything. It's against the law. They'll take both of you away from her. Mrs. Mitchell said so, and I believe her. She knows about stuff like that." April nodded slowly as Ted talked. She kept a brave face on, but Ted was pretty sure she was scared to have the problem laid out like a fish on a skinning board. It scared him too. In a small voice, April said, "So, you've got an idea?" Ted did have an idea, but it had changed 3 times just in the last hour. He went with his newest concept. "My idea is that I come out here later with my mom, just me and my mom in our van. Your mom knows me, and she'll like my mom, and my mom will invite your mom and her family to come and stay at our place for a few days." April shook her head. "She won't want to do that." Ted said, "She'll be okay when she sees how people want to help." April said, "People wanted to help us back in Texas, too, from the Army, family assistance people. Mama didn't like it when they came, always ended up crying, and then she'd pack us up and took off." Ted said, "But this won't be like an Army visit. It'll be a mom talking to another mom." "Well, my mom will want to run off if I tell her you're coming." "Then what?" Ted shrugged. "Don't tell her. Make her stay. You and Artie. Tell her that both of you really want to go and stay at the Hammonds for a visit." "You mean say no to my mom? You don't know her. She'll get mad." Ted felt like he had to be tough, almost mean. Who cares if she gets mad, as long as she gets helped? Because she needs help. That's what my teacher says, so she can stop being scared, because she doesn't have to be scared, not about anything. Ted thought a second, then said, "Maybe you shouldn't tell her we're coming. My mom and I will just show up, but you do whatever you think's best." April looked back toward the door and then said, "You better go now. She's going to wake up soon." "So, when are you coming back?" Pulling a time out of thin air, Ted said, "About 4 o'clock. Just me and my mom." April made a face like she stubbed a toe. "And you're sure I've got to do this?" "I'm sure you've got to do something. That's all I'm sure about, and this makes more sense than anything else I can think of." April shrugged. "Then I guess we've got to try it." "Yeah," said Ted, "we do." He bent down and picked up his bike. "Have a good day, okay?" "Won't be easy," she said. "Thank you for the food and the book." And as Ted got to the corner of the house, April called softly, "Hey, you were right about the pump at the other place. Works great now. Bye." Ted smiled over his shoulder and waved, and at that moment he wished with all his heart that he didn't look like a giant goldfinch on a bicycle.